Okay. This last chapter is talking about three emerging structures of channels. And what it also does is it underpins what started these particular things as well. So there's a little bit of history over the last 20 years that entails in this chapter. And we're going to move through and kind of give you an idea of where we've been and where we've headed. And so there's three great trends that have happened over the last 20 years, and which, given the impetus, we expect to go on into the future. And so these are services, the growth of globalization, and of course, the one that nobody's surprised about is e-commerce. And we'll also talk about how do we implement services, where is the best way to do globalization, and what are the ways that we can create future or greater e-commerce. And so the shift to service-based economies, globalization, and the growth of the e-commerce, let us start by talking about services. Emerson Electric is the maker of refrigeration equipment for grocery stores. And so the big stand-up refrigeration units and the freezers, the frost-free freezers, they are the makers of those particular goods. Now, when you sell a product, you invariably encounter seasonal variations. Anybody want to guess when the greatest demand for those refrigerators are during the year? What season they would be?
Black Friday or probably.
But it's a good guess. Think about like during the refrigeration products themselves, big stand-up freezers. When would you expect?
Summertime.
There you go, right on the button. Yes. Invariably, you have two things happen. One of them is that you will have issues with the equipment themselves, that the equipment comes under a load now because it's hot. And of course, the other difficulty is that there's usually the need to store goods that you may not have enough room for. Now, Emerson, the difficulty that they have is the same as any product manufacturer, is that demand is seasonal. It peaks up in around spring and then into summer, then dives down and unfortunately goes away around Christmas. Well, Emerson decided that they had to find a way of getting out of this constant loop that they were in. So Emerson bought back all of their equipment. They bought all of it back. And then what they did was they leased those goods back to the very same customers. They provided warranty contracts as well, and they included maintenance on those service agreements as well. So remember I talked about the quick ratio and the need to always have liquid assets, survival of any organization. What it did for the customers was that it no longer required investments in capital equipment that were beyond their ability to be able to sustain, no matter how they amortized it. So it meant, quite simply, that instead of having that capital tied up in goods, it meant that that capital could be doing something else. Everybody who does accounting will know that instead of taking that as an asset or an asset on the balance sheet, you turn it into an expense, and that expense can be taken off your income tax. It moves and does something entirely different to your balance sheet. All right. So for the customer, it provided a good deal, but it did a good deal more as well. It allowed Emerson to get out of this peak and valley and provide consistent income for the entire year. It meant that your customer, instead of always having concern about contacting you, saying, oh my gosh, I've got one more expense, it actually encouraged the customer to let you know if something was going wrong so that it could be fixed before something major happened. And the third thing that it also did was it allowed the Emerson to deal directly with their consumers and in essence, take out the middleman, and they became much closer to their consumers as well. And it became a win-win situation. You had a greater frequency of interaction, which created greater customer satisfaction. And the other thing that it did, and this is the one thing, is it made Emerson unique. It meant that they were no longer just selling products, they were providing services. And services is the name of the game, especially when you're selling goods that are so much like each other. I've said it before, if I have two pieces of equipment that are exactly the same, how do I choose which piece of equipment to get? Right. There you go. Thank you. Exactly. Services, by changing this from a product to a service, makes this product unique, and it also creates a barrier of entry. It's by the very same notion why you really don't want to get out of, sometimes, no matter how bad your cell service is, you really don't want to go through the hassle of changing providers. It's just like I said, a hassle, and this is a barrier of entry that Emerson did to an enormous success. So what the process that Emerson did is what's known as, of course, is disintermediation, which we talked about in chapter 1 and chapter 2. Excuse me, is when the manufacturer removes a channel partner in order to sell directly to the end user. Let me also say that this is another direct result in the growth of e-commerce as well. It reduces the sales going to an intermediary partner. It can create difficulty, of course, removing partners out of the system. But what it does still is, as I said, it makes you unique and makes you harder to replace. And so this is one of the trends. It is the trend for services. Now, even if I'm going to McDonald's, the fact is that most companies don't sell products, they create services. What you find is what's known as the service ratio, where it's the percentage of your sales comes from providing a service versus a product. As the service ratio goes up, the more desire for your long-term connection goes up as well. When I go to McDonald's, I'm buying convenience as well. Reasonably good chance of protein for my daughters, as long as they eat the chicken and not the cup. And it just provides more. What it means also is that I have to transition. I have to increase that service ratio. Because if I increase that service ratio, I create greater heterogeneity and a better connection to my consumers. And so what is a service? If we are going to define it, we're going to define each one of these things one at a time, what they are in terms of their meaning for service, and then why they're demanded. So the first thing we need to talk about is the definition of service is that services are intangible. It is performance and use. Service can't be touched. It can't be seen in the same way as other products. By the fact of its intangibility, it can't be inventoried. It can't be, well, it said it can't be patented. The process can be patented, I should say that, because the way that Wendy's makes their hamburgers certainly is a process. But the final product, perhaps not, let's just say it that way. You can't physically display it, but it has a very significant influence. Services are generally in the old marketing definition, they are consumed at the point of purchase. By their very notion of their intangibility and the difficulty for consumers to determine their value, especially in the first time purchase, the buyer has a natural desire to seek a stronger relationship because that helps manage risk. And of course, as risk goes up, the reputation becomes even greater. So I had horrendous knee problems 3 years ago, and to the point where I was walking with a cane, and it was painful. And I had seen 2 or 3 physicians here, and I was at a desperate point. I couldn't walk without it, and it was awful. And I finally saw my GP, and on his recommendation, I chose Dr. Anderson here. And so Anderson, I went in to see him, and this is a good doctor. This is when, he just touched my knee and said, "It's not your knee." And he said, "Why don't you get on the table?" And as I got up on the table, he said, "What your problem is?" So he x-rayed my hip, my ball joint was gone. All right. After 30 years of basketball and exercising and everything, my ball socket had gone. When I was 16 years old, I was hit in the hip during football. And after all of these years, it had finally worn away. That's an example of that, his reputation preceded everything, and he was worth every moment of it. It took an hour and a half for them to do the hip surgery. In 2 days, I was walking again. It changed my life. But I went to him first because he had a brand reputation that was infallible. By the way, he went to Duke to get his training. He's from here originally. To do surgery at Duke, you got to stand in line. And they came here and said, "You can do as many surgeries as you want," and that's why he's here. So, intangibility. The next is performance heterogeneity, which means that everything is unique. In a manufactured process, products go in a very highly controlled factory environment. The concept of Six Sigma means is that there will be 4 instances of errors in every 1 million units of production. That's what Six Sigma means. It means 3 standard deviations away from the center. And that's what Six Sigma means. Which means that the production process itself has to be to a certain exact standards. Services are the entirely different way. Services are very dependent on a very particular employee delivering a particular service, which makes it very hard to standardize performance. Who in here has one person that cuts their hair and no one else? Yeah. It's a very specialized thing. And that is something that comes from trust. And so because you have superior individuals delivering services and inferior ones, it means that my natural tendency is I want to know this person as much as I can before I trust them, which naturally drives you to want to know more. By the very same token, if I am more directly connected to my end users, I can better control the delivery of my services. Which also means that my consumer becomes more focused on me, and it's a natural reduction of the channel intent. In other words, they have fewer choices because I deliver hopefully what they want. And so it is intangible. It is heterogeneous, which means that it is more unique. And then the other part is a very high degree of co-production. In 2004, Bargo and Lush, two professors, wrote what was called a seminal issue. A paradigm shift in marketing happened from that time on. Bargo and Lush wrote the concept is that consumers, in the process itself of buying, create their own value. And that consumers are directly responsible for the value that they get by the value of things they put in, their own effort. And so with my wife, Dr. Albinson, she and I wrote an article talking about individuals with personal trainers, okay? So if I were to go to a personal trainer and say, I want to be fit, what does that mean? All right. In the last 100 years, fit has meant corpulence, which means overweight. When you realize or think about that, when my grandmother was growing up, a healthy baby was a big baby, all right? Because we're talking about the poverty of the depression. So that was considered fit. It's also meant thin. It's also meant toned. It's also meant muscular. All of those things could be considered fit. What a personal trainer does is translate your desires into a series of exercises that you perform and you create fitness within yourself. Well, that's what this means, is that the consumer is more than just a bystander. The consumer is present at the time of production, and they're helping to be able to create their own value. Products are just manufactured, shipped, and inventory, but a customer goes out and creates the value, which means that in a traditional sense, delivery is non-traditional. And so there needs to be a structure with different channels to address different needs because, as we all know, consumers are different. And so that is another thing that the consumer does. The consumer helps create their own value. And I have been a firm believer that that's also one of the main drivers of the omni-channel right now. So I bought my daughter is about to be 11 years old on the 15th. And so I finally broke down and bought her an iPhone 15. I hope to see her again sometime, maybe. But one of the things, yeah, man, she's on the phone all the time. Found out 2/3 of her class already had phones. But she's 11, she's about to go into middle school. She can't do after school. It's time. So anyway, one of the things she wanted was this one particular phone case. But we were in Covington and it was going to be delivered on Saturday. However, I can set my own delivery date. And that is an example of co-production. And I've got a research project I'm working on. The greater number of those things you put in the hands of consumers, my point is the greater value that the consumer will create himself. This is consistent with that time. Okay. If you give the consumer a chance to create their own value, they will create success. And so this is just a little bit we'll talk about. IBM has a fascinating history. Personal computers, not PCs, but just computers for home use, started in the 70s with MSI and then Radio Shack, and then of course Apple started some of that with the Apple II. But it wasn't until the IBM PC in 1983 when they finally developed that the consumer industry took off, and within 3 years, 40 million PCs were sold. The Apple II never sold more than 800,000. But one of the things that IBM did was not have fewer choices, but more, all right? They gave the consumer a chance to co-create their machines. And so the head of IBM at that time, by the name of Philip Don Estridge, actually the head of Entry Systems Division, which what the PCs were, allowed consumers to put their own hard drives in machines. That was heresy, all right? Philip Don Estridge, developed and published the IEEE standards of everything inside the IBM PC. So you could have different people making memory for it. You could have Seagate making hard drives for it. You could have Hayes making modems for it. You could have TDX making monitors for it. That is an example of this co-production and co-creation happening. And it all comes about through a channel strategy of allowing your consumers to create their own value. And the PCs became valuable, not because they were like every other PC, but they were unique, okay? So, and basically what you see now is IBM is just basically a pure service division. 2001, they're no longer in the desktop industry. 2007, they sell their laptop industry to Lenovo. They're in essence a service division now for the betterment. So given the services are what you develop and not products, how do you do it? Because services are unique. They don't have necessarily the same pathway that if you wanted to do a product. Hyundai in the 90s wanted to be one of the top five manufacturers of automobiles rated by J.D. Power, and this is in the 90s. In the third year, they were ranked number 2 worldwide because it was basically a roadmap to just make better products. Well, services are a little different. You got 3 ways to do it. The first is in-house development. Anybody see Top Gun Maverick? Or does everybody see? Okay, so the Dark Star, remember the Mach 10 vehicle? If you noticed on the back, on the tail of the Mach 10 vehicle, there was a skunk, all right? There's a picture of a skunk looking back at you, and that is actually the symbol of Lockheed, all right? The skunk is a symbol that's known as the Lockheed Skunk Works, okay? All of the great developments from Lockheed, the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71, all of those came from this place in Victorville, California, which is in the middle of the desert, where engineers and operations people just stayed away from the central office and they were just there to make great stuff, okay? So in-house development is one of the ways that you can do it, but it's slow and expensive. And sometimes you're pitting a supplier directly against your channel partners. That can happen. The next is you collaborate. You can select partners to work together. It limits the risk that you have in your investments, but you don't totally own the product. So in the 80s, GM and Toyota built a factory in Northern California to develop the next generation of Toyota Corollas and Chevy Novas. So in 2 years, they created a new Toyota Corolla subcompact and a new Chevy Nova that was bolt for bolt the same, exact same thing. Except that the Corolla, because of the reputation of Toyota, outsold the Nova 5-1, same vehicle. Yeah. Interesting thing, that factory now is owned by Tesla and it's making Model 3s now. So there's history for you. The last is, and these are test questions anyway, but this is the test question. The fastest way of acquiring service capability is through acquisition. The fastest way to increase your service capability is to buy it. It gives you the best chance for success. The supplier operates as an acquisition. It has its own management team, but you don't mess with success. Apple in 2011 decided they couldn't beat Beats, and so they bought them. And they kept the same group in. I think the same organization is doing everything that they were doing before, except they are a subdivision of Apple. By the very same notion, Microsoft was losing or never really got the ability to outdo Skype in Microsoft, what do they call it? Not Teams, might have been that.
TV.
That's it. Got it. Thank you. So they just decided to buy Skype. And so Microsoft owns Skype, but they haven't done anything stupid like put any Microsoft logo on it. So acquiring it is the fastest, quickest way, and it also has the greatest chance of success. Now, let me also say that when you're transitioning the services, you're going to make some enemies along the way. Can't help it. Those individuals, if you're disintermediation, you're going to be getting rid of partners. And during that withdrawal period, they may just decide that they're getting out entirely. Or they may say, no, thank you, we're going to do all of these things ourselves and basically partner with another corporation to provide the same things. But it's an eventuality. You're getting out of business anyway. And so there's a growth to services, and there are strategies to transition the service, of which acquisition is the fastest and the greatest chance of success. All right, the next one is the trend of globalization in marketing channels. In the last 30 years, again, there have been mega trends that have been moving the world towards a greater growth globalization, beyond just merely that the factories in China produce equipment or that has lower labor costs. There are other things, other factors that are going on. And so there are three main ones. In the industrial world, or let's just say the traditional world or traditional markets, the developed world, excuse me, that's the better word. The developed world, you're finding that those markets have a rapidly aging population in which the populations are not increased because of just decreasing birth rates. And there's an overall greater competitive rivalry that is going on within the developing nations. And so the need to find new sources of revenue is one of the reasons why globalization is occurring. Now, but you also have to think this too, is that emerging markets and emerging nations are also expanding, and in essence, what you have is this great cross connection going on. And so after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you saw all of these markets, especially the ones in Eastern Europe, that all of a sudden had these avenues into Western Europe that they never had before. This goes along with the opening of international markets. There were two major treaties in the 30 years before this that caused a rapid expansion of international growth. One of them is NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement. It was 1992. And the North American Free Trade Agreement opened many of the restrictions between Canada, the United States, Mexico, and Central America, and in essence created a large free trade zone between that and in all of North America. Following up that in 1996 was the GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Treaties, which encompassed perhaps all of the developing nations, all the developed nations at that time. And so these openings of international markets created these opportunities to advance the infrastructure as well. And of course, the capability of the internet to be able to accelerate that expansion helped as well. And you can't overstate the ability for the internet, starting in the 90s, started connecting individuals to ways it could not happen through a simple mail. The last is that your focus no longer came into the market in which you were in or the country that you were in, but basically everywhere. You started to expand sales in all sorts of areas, and you can leverage your competitive advantages, not to just one market, but to markets all over the world. You also had advances in infrastructures, and so you had changes in regulations. Let me also not understate also that the collapse of the Soviet Union, especially in Eastern Europe, brought the opportunities along with these others where there was interaction that was occurring at a level that we've never seen. So if you travel in Iceland or in if you've gone to Norway, there's a brand of vehicle there called Stada, S-T-A-D-A. They are small, they're compact vehicles. They have diesel engines, standard transmissions. They're made in the Czech Republic or in Hungary. They are unique special vehicles. The transmissions are made in Germany. The vehicles are made in Hungary, Romania, Czech Republic. And there's this wonderful eclectic kind of mix that goes on. Transmissions made in one place, shipped to Poland, shipped to Czech Republic. You have the very same thing happening in the Asian countries. Subaru, 1/4 of Subaru is owned by Toyota now. And Subaru had this excellent 4-cylinder engine that was actually flat. The cylinders went like this. The problem with Subarus is their transmissions were garbage. So Toyota bought 1/4. They provide the 7-speed transmissions now for Subaru, and they're outstanding vehicles. And they connected a turbocharger to that 4-cylinder engine, and that little stinky 4-cylinder engine can outrun my 6-cylinder Highlander. My wife has a Subaru. I'm not sure I like it. Anyway, but that's an example of what globalization can do. You can develop the best parts in somewhere else, and folks, Toyota's transmissions are rock solid. The 2018 version is the one that had the worst problems, but since then, from 2020 on, that's what makes them so special. Okay, globalization. Now, what we found is there's been a shakeout period because naturally, once you have partners competing against each other, there's a certain amount of conflict that naturally is going to happen because you're replacing them. And if you're going in developing markets, the opportunity is that you're competing against someone else, okay? So I'm not going to worry about those slides, and I'm going to end with this. Once again, pointing out that the fastest way to gain meaningful sales in a market generally requires a first-hand knowledge, and the fastest way is the acquisition approach. There are many times that in order to be successful in a market, you've got to know the market itself. It is very easy to make a cultural mistake too. So I taught for 7 weeks in South Korea. I loved it. The people are just really marvelous. South Korea is a very interesting culture because in many ways the society is almost structured like a Scandinavian culture. They're very hierarchical in structure. There's a very stiff kind of starting teacher, student, those kind of things. There's very, what I would call horizontal levels of strata. But the unique thing about cultures like that is it's sometimes even considered difficult for individuals to know each other. So in order for you to gain friends in a country like that, it's very possible that you're gonna have to go get drunk with, okay? So, yeah, pardon me?
Told you.
Yes,
What
yes,
that means.
exactly, yes, exactly. So, yeah, so like I was there and in South Korea, and I mean, my students wanted to take me out drinking, all right? They feel like if they can break down your barriers, get you away from that. It's like when you're really drunk, well, then they get to know you, they understand.
I was there for a year too, so.
Okay, so you get it, right? Yes,
So we go down, so there's students that would like, when they see that you're a foreigner, they would ask if they can buy you dinner
yeah,
and like show you around Seoul for free, like totally free, and you'll think like, oh, sketchy.
yeah,
And then they actually just want to talk to you so they can practice their English.
yes.
That's pretty cool.
That does
sound sketchy.
It does, and your initial thought is, what are they trying to do? And like with me, also in the last week before I was gonna give finals, they wanted to go out and have a drink with me, their team. And, fortunately, I read this stuff on the cultures. And, I did go out and have a drink with them, and I had a few, but I wasn't going to get drunk off my gourd, okay? They just want, they feel like they know you, or let's just say they know the real person. Once you've had a few drinks and you're relaxed, then they know who you are. Then they'll trust you, okay? Scandinavian countries, surprising, or not maybe unsurprising, it's the same way. It's a very strict, ordered structure. They have a very ordered society. But one of the things that drinking does is it gives them an outlet, a way of acting out that normally would not be accepted in their culture.
In Germany.
Yeah, Germany, Norway, Sweden, my wife, my father-in-law and her uncle really didn't like me, or they liked me. But it was when we had the 120 proof vodka and coffee that we really became friends, okay? And I had to uphold the American honor. I was drinking against a Norwegian and a Swede, okay? So what can I do?
You
So,
can't play their game over there. I was in Germany for 6 years. too.
yeah, they can really drink it. So.
Their beer there is way stronger. than
Yes.
Here.
Well, we were beyond that. We were the 120 for vodka and the coffee, and we started watching this is 2014. We're watching the soccer match, and anyway, I stayed up. All right, I defended America. What was that wrong? Anyway, and it's kind of interesting. American cultures are actually different. You can act any way you want to in American culture, but you're being frowned on if you act out when you're drunk. It's just society. Society finds many ways of adjusting. And for those cultures, that's the way they adjust. And yes, the drinking is a safety valve so that you can pop off steam without, without,
Responsibility,
or to be able,
no shame.
right. Everybody needs a chance to blow steam, all right? And that's what it did for them, and it's also what it did for South Korea too. Yeah. But in those respects, it's healthy. All right, it's healthy. So this local culture, or what you get with the acquisition, is you have that local knowledge, you can execute, you're part of the society and you understand how to succeed. And the other way that you can do it is the business format franchising model, where you maintain the standard format, but you have local managers. You have local owners if you can. It means that the managers understand the cultures in which they work in, and you're sensitive to the market. And so, especially in a global society, understanding the local cultures is one of those ways that you achieve success. So my nephews, I have two, well, I have a lot of nephews, but two of my nephews actually went to dinner at my mother-in-law's place in Stockholm. And just to know what it was like to have dinner at someone's apartment in Sweden. I mean, we see those things in the tourists, but it's one thing. I got invited to someone's home for dinner in South Korea. I consider that to be an honorable thing, to be shown someone's room, someone's house and how they live.
Do they take their shoes off in Korea?
They take them off in Stockholm, definitely. They do that in Korea, but yeah, if you're in Scandinavia, you take your shoes off at the door, okay? That's considered South Korea as well, all right? Kind of interesting about soju and other things like that. In the 70s in South Korea, there was a famine and rice became one of those things that was rationed. But it almost became a point of national honor to be able to continue to have soju. And so they found ways of growing more.
So is that, yeah, alcohol with rice? It's plum wine.
Plum wine, yeah, yes. And rice, yeah, right.
They got different.
Oh, yeah.
Flavors and so.
Mm-hmm. Sneak right up. How did you drink it, by the way? How did you?
So we usually mix it Kool-Aid, right, or Gatorade.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then a lot of ice.
Yeah.
And you just drink it so good that you don't notice until
Until you can't get up.
you don't just drink it straight. You can't drink it straight up. A lot of arashi, which is the grandpa do it like that.
Yeah.
Shot of plum wine.
Yeah.
But you know.
It's not as smooth as wine is, so generally it's mixed with other drinks. Yeah.
It's almost like vodka, flavored vodka.
Yes, flavored vodkas. Yeah, it is heavily fermented. Okay, last thing, e-commerce. And so e-commerce is no surprise. But the truth is, of course, as e-commerce has started and it continues to rise. And usually the primary desire is to tap into fast-growing markets. E-commerce, of course, has enormous advantages. The cost of the infrastructure is minimal, or let's just say less. The amount of staff you need can be minimal. 2 years ago, I had a student of mine who was running a marketplace store on Amazon, and he was selling, how would I say it? It's like automobile additives that you could only find in like modern Subaru would. He found he had this connection to this supplier in Virginia, and so he was able to sell these things on the open market. And he was getting grief, of course, from modern Subaru and places like that, but he was selling them nationwide. He was doing so well, he was paying his way through college. That's the kind of thing that you can do, e-commerce, that you could not do any other way, all right? So I'm gonna go past some of these things because I want to get to some of the advantages. So you have the ability to have small suppliers that don't necessarily have the channel access to enter the market, but they have a product that consumers desire. There's no need for any startup investments. If you have a good website, if you can promote through social media, if you know how to do search engine targeting, which is almost a lost art, knowing how to do the meta symbol work right in it, and you can go online pretty quickly. Those are the advantages of doing e-commerce. Probably to me, one of the greater advantages also is the fact that you give the consumers greater control. And that's one of my things I always talk about, is to achieve success and to give the consumers more control. So I'm going to pass through these things. Say one other danger that e-commerce has is the problem of free riding. The disadvantage is free riding. So Best Buy was literally going out of business because of the problem of free riding in 2011 through 2014. What was happening was consumers were coming in, looking at the products at Best Buy, and then scanning the barcode and finding a cheaper price online. What can you say? All right. 40% of all electronics are sold online, and I've said this one before, but 2/3 of those people who buy online go to a store to actually see what it looks like. You know, it's the need to touch, that visceral feel to know exactly what it looks like and how it's going to look to you. Best Buy was able to counteract that by able to do price matching, and they were able to survive that way, but it was very difficult. And so that's the disadvantage. With that, let me finally go into discussion about adding online channels as strategies and the disadvantages of one big reason why you add channels, especially online. Online channels require you to move all of your services and equivalents over onto an online platform. The difficulty with that also is you have what's called channel pollution or cross-channel pollution, which means this. So when I bought my 75-inch television, when I finally got tenure, I first looked online. I did my searches with Google search engine. Once I found the television I wanted, I started looking through the suppliers. As I looked through the suppliers, I started thinking about delivery. Once I thought about delivery, I went back to the suppliers again. And ultimately, this is what cross-channel pollution is. It's the difficulty of understanding where the initial investment came in, and it makes it very hard for individuals to be able to know the consumer's journey. It makes it very hard for you to know that. But why? Why do you do it? Here's the reason why. It's this line now, right? Firms that invest in multiple channels earn more from their customers. That's the reason why. The more channels you have for the consumer, the more money you earn. It's the only reason to be in business. Disadvantages are channel pollution or cross-channel pollution. The advantages, you earn more from your customers. Simple as that. And so let me wrap up talking about the multi-channel and the omni-channel. So when Sears catalog sales were 150 years ago, there was one of the first great examples of multi-channel. Sears had standard retail stores, but in every Sears you had was a catalog section. And at that, it was a big desk, or it might have been a large desk where you did returns, but they would have catalogs. They would have catalogs from here to here. And that would cover from Christmas all the way to the next Christmas, everything that they had. And you could come along into the catalog, go to a particular place, find a certain part. You could order that part from Sears. They could deliver it to the store. You could pick it up in the store. If it was something big, they could deliver it to your home. If it was something like a dishwasher, they could arrange for service, so it's delivered with service. Here we are. We're talking about things that we're talking about now, and we're talking about how they happened 150 years ago. That is an example of the multi-channel. The multi-channel is when the consumers are given more than one outlet for their consumer purchases from a single company. It is if each channel existed separately into itself. And so the catalog could exist by itself, and the retail store doesn't have to be there. The retail store could exist by itself and the catalog didn't have to be there. The mail order could be by itself. This is what the multi-channels are. Multi-channels are more than one outlet for their consumer purchases from a single company. And now it's important to understand that the starting point for the consumer is the starting point of the company itself. And so the strategy is to consider, how do we add those to the existing mix? Well, along 2009, I was asking a question about who has a smartphone, and I found everyone in the room had a smartphone, and I realized something was happening that I didn't know about. And this was the start of one of the concepts of the multi-channel that started to see things happen online, but it wasn't the omni-channel yet. So 2013, Walmart bought Jet.com. Jet.com was a dynamic search engine that you could put something in and it would crawl across retail websites to find the cheapest price. Walmart bought it. They bought Voodoo.com. They've sold Voodoo, by the way. They retired Jet. The CEO of Jet is now the CIO of Walmart. They bought Moose Jaw. Flipkart, which is the Indian equivalent of Amazon, and now they own shoes.com. Each one of those places is unique and different and is not a part of Walmart, but something else was bigger was happening. I started seeing my students going out and looking for things, but not involving the stores themselves until they finish their searches. And so what we have here is a major, in Rigby was the first use of the word omni-channel. And then this was the first definition where we really talked about what the omni-channel was. As the retailing industry moves towards a seamless omni-channel retailing experience, the distinctions between the physical and the online will vanish, turning the world into a showroom without walls. That's the omni-channel experience. When you initiate the search for a good, you don't start with a store, you start with Google. And then once you find the goods that you want in the searching for the goods, then you start finding the stores you want to buy it from. And that's the difference. If we look at the multi-channel versus the omni-channel, the digital world, the online world, and the print world exist together, but each one of those can exist separately outside of itself. The omni-channel, the consumer or the customer is the initiator of everything, and the customer is the one who builds the structure themselves. And so the last question, if it comes to an essay question, is what is the difference? And here's your essay answer. The multi-channel is customer-centric. The omni-channel is customer-driven. The omni-channel is customer-driven. And the omni-channel exists without the existence of stores. The stores come in after the consumer has finished their search process and is finding the location where they want to buy things. And we invest in the omni-channel experience. It's called the limitless shelves. Like theoretically, you could go on forever. And that is the future as we see it now. And that's why in 2008, I couldn't find a supply chain class to be able to take to get my minor. And now I'm teaching 3 sections of channels because the omni-channel has taken over everything. Okay. All right, that's the latest we've done so far. Okay, we're finished. Test Monday will be 6, 7, 8, and 9. For those of you who filled out my surveys, I'll be giving you those points.
Hey, do we do that today?
Was that,
Is it past due to do that? That's all right.
tell you what, until Friday,
All right.
all right, if you still want to fill out the survey, do it till Friday. And then, like I said, if you invest and go to the summit, I'll give you 10 points on the final test.
We have a position paper due on the 18th.
Yes, but we'll talk about it later.
All right, sounds good.
All right, y'all have a good week.
Thanks.
You bet.
Yeah. See you later. See you, guys.